Welcome to the Writing with Purpose podcast, where I, Anna Woolliscroft, chat with fellow writers and outdoor enthusiasts about how we can embrace creativity and curiosity to live a life full of adventure that doesn't feel like hard work. I delve into exploratory conversations about my two loves in life, writing and nature connection, as part of my mission to share the well-being benefits they both bring. It's wonderful to have you here today. On today's Writing with Purpose podcast, I'm chatting with Ellie Lloyd-Jones, a wild coach who helps purpose-led people find freedom for their physical and mental well-being by getting out from their desks and into nature. Hi Ellie, welcome to this morning's podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you about all things creative, nature connectedness, and just knowing what you have sort of done with your career and how you've changed over the past couple of years, which I'll ask you just to give us a little nutshell look into shortly. I love everything that you stand for as a wild coach, and using outdoors and getting moving as something just to help, people, and there's so many people that will relate to this of just overwhelmed and just feeling as though, there's something not quite right here, and you're, helping people to sort of pull out, what is right for them. So, welcome, Ellie. Do you want to just introduce yourself and maybe to give us a little bit of an insight into your journey over the past couple of years to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me as well. I love talking about this sort of thing. So any invitation to wax lyrical about being outdoors, I'm there. Yeah. I'm Ellie Lloyd-Jones. I am founder of my wild coaching business, which is Elevate with Ellie. And I set it up just coming up to 3 years ago now, at the end of 2020. Prior to that, I was in the corporate world for 20 years, predominantly coaching and leading others, leading big teams for performance. And I loved it until I didn't, which suddenly sort of, I was kind of part of the whole corporate machine where you work harder and you get good bonuses, and that just propels you to work even harder. And they just got to a point where I was like, what am I doing this for anymore? I just don't know who this is serving. I don't feel like I'm particularly aligned to the company. I've got 3 children and I wasn't doing the best for them. I wasn't doing the best for any aspect of my life, really. And I just suddenly thought, why am I doing this? And then I had a big period of burnout, which left me off sick for about 5 months. And that was a real eye-opener. It made me, the stress and the mental toll that it was taking to just be on that treadmill and fighting for my sort of survival, which is what it sometimes feels like in a corporate world. To then have it physically manifest in my body to make me physically ill was a real eye-opener for me. And that was the start of me having quite a big change in my whole life, I suppose. So my family and I moved from South Manchester. We used to live in Altrincham for about 12 years, and we've moved to the lovely countryside of just outside Tarporley, where there's just lots of greenery and lots of fields and lots of nature. And I took all of the experience that I have in the corporate world of leading people for performance, but bringing the nature element in and bringing in that element of what I see makes people really shine and what's really good for them, and brought that into my wild coaching business. So that's what I do now. I help people to, as you alluded to before, I kind of help people understand what success means for them on their terms, get them to really feel in, get out of their head and into their body, and really start to use their whole body rather than just their head to make decisions, to trust in what their body's telling them. And a lot of that can be really complemented by being outdoors. So I do that wild coaching. And then for business owners who it can be quite lonely to work on your own, it's something that you really want to do. So I put on co-working and networking events. So we just get out together, have a chat, and being in nature just brings an extra element that you don't get when you're in 4 walls. And
Yeah, definitely. There's just so much more, I think, partly because of the expansiveness of the countryside around you and not having the constraints of those four walls. But it just seems to be, and I think you've mentioned it before, when you start to move, everything kind of internally starts to move as well. So physically and mentally work together. And that's really helpful when you actually are able to get outside. And I think it's a shame as well, you mentioned, with your own career and your own story, that you got to the point where you were completely burnt out, really, and you had to have so many months off sick. And it's a shame that, people keep going and keep going and keep going, and then that happens and it just sort of stops you in your tracks. And that's the point when you sort of think about it. Whereas if we can get to people before that point and say, look, you kind of, something not quite right, let's get outside and see if we can feel almost what's going on, and like you alluded to, help people to get in touch with what's going on inside and physically, and to sort of work through their purpose almost, and what are they on this planet for, really.
And to trust that as well. I think a big part of that is trusting that feeling, because I say this to quite a few people, but I find it really really powerful that as humans we've evolved. Our prefrontal cortex, the sort of language part of our brain, is really, really new in comparison to the really primitive reptilian part of our brain that's responsible for emotions and reactions. So our bodies are still give us feedback and give us communication that we don't have language for. So all of those feelings and sensations in our body, they're actually really important. And we're not trained, we're not conditioned, we're not trained to value those feelings as much as we are the thoughts and the language that our brain uses. So I know that I was definitely in a position where all of those pains and aches and feelings were something that I medicated. So I'll have some paracetamol because that niggly head is getting in the way of me doing what I need to do. Whereas if you actually start to unpick that headache, the pain in my head was actually telling me that I needed to slow down, because it was started off as a niggle, and then it got to be quite painful, and then it got to be a migraine, and then my body got to a point where it floored me and I couldn't get out of bed. And my body had been telling me that for about 18 months. And the way that I'd been brought up, I didn't trust that. I just thought it was an inconvenience. So sometimes it takes us learning the hard way, doesn't it?
It does, and like you say, you medicated, so we put this plaster over something to think that is going to be a cure, or eventually it'll go away, and it won't. You're just actually numbing it for a period of time, but then it's still going to show somewhere, and probably so much bigger than how it first started. You said, a few little niggly headaches, and then it got worse, and then you couldn't get out of bed with it. And it's interesting what you say about sort of the science and the parts of the brain, and I find anything like that fascinating. Neuroscience, psychology, how all of our behaviors work. But just by you saying that, I think people listening would think, oh, okay, I better start listening to it then. Sometimes people just need the facts as well, don't they, to kind of which is the wrong way around, really, but they need the facts of something to prove that what they're feeling inside, or their intuition, or that gut feeling, or whatever we want to call it, actually is something we need to listen to.
Exactly. The reasoning behind, I'm someone like that. You could tell me something 100 times, and unless you tell me, unless I understand the inner workings of it, that light bulb doesn't really go off. But it's really important. And for me now, I start to get contractions in my chest when I'm starting to feel really tight. And for me to listen to that, I then know that I need to get outside into nature, because there's an expansiveness in nature, and there's just freedom, and getting to be able to breathe in the fresh air. And there's something about, there's lots of research into the healing impact of being around trees and things for your mental well-being, and just being in nature and the greenery. That's what we were made to do way back before we got into this sort of rat race and competitiveness.
Definitely, we evolved from being outside. We're outdoor beings at the end of the day. That's where we came from. We weren't meant to have all this artificial stuff around us, heat, televisions, all that sort of stuff that's just kind of being thrown at us, that is very artificial. And I think a lot of that tends to norm our own perceptions to things, our own senses to things. We sort of, we've kind of almost lost, I think, the connectedness to being outside in nature that is so ancient and just built, ingrained in us, really. And there's that kind of partition that seems to be getting bigger and bigger with a lot of people. And then I don't know if you have an experience like you did in corporate world, or you reach a certain age or whatever that definitely seems to be around about the late 30s, early 40s mark, that people start to think, actually, this isn't right. I need to get out the rat race a little bit and, slow down, take my time a little bit more. And before we started recording this podcast, we touched a little bit on creativity, didn't we? And I think that is a great way for people to sort of try and learn a little bit more about themselves, about, where things aren't serving them properly, what's unhelpful, and then trying to learn what is unhelpful. And I think creativity is a big part of that, and just exploring that creativity within. So, how do you stay creative, Ellie? What are the kind of tools and tricks that you use?
It's so interesting. I was thinking about this morning before we joined the podcast, and I was thinking it's so interesting that when I worked in the corporate world, and everything prior to, say, the last 4 or 5 years, I would have said that I'm not a creative person. I'm not really that creative. I'm somebody who, you tell me to do something and I'll do it. I'm more sort of just getting the job done. I don't come up with the ideas. But it's only since I started to probably start my own business that I actually realized I do have a lot of creative ideas. I do have a lot of creativity within me. I just don't think that my previous life, as it were, encouraged them or promoted them or nurtured them at all. So for me now, in terms of creativity, I realize that I've got a very busy brain that's constantly got some ideas, and I'm constantly sparked by things that I see, things that I hear, and just connections that I have with people. And they start to, did you ever watch, is it the Queen's Gambit, the chess, the program about chess on Netflix?
I think so.
I don't know if you ever watched it. It was because she was very strategic, and she'd on this thing she'd lie in bed, and then all of these chess pieces would appear on the ceiling and stuff. She'd be able to see the structure of it and move it all, and she'd have like this game plan in her head. And that's a little bit like how I see creativity. So something will spark me, and there'll suddenly be all these connections as to where it kind of hits. And we were talking earlier, weren't we, about how taking a break from work can help with creativity.
Yeah.
And that it really helps to take that break, but you can't really switch creativity on and off in the same way. So there will be times when I try to have a break and I can't, because this idea will come and I need to write it down and capture it before it goes off again.
Yeah, it's just
one of
flow.
Yeah, it is. But I think there's two things that really helped my creativity. One was starting to understand my own hormonal cycle, to be honest. So there's certain parts in my hormone cycle where I am much more creative, and just understanding that means that I allow myself the time and the space during that period of time to be really creative. And then other parts of my cycle means that I then progress that creative thought or idea. And the other thing is getting outside into nature, walking, just having that freedom, moving. As you said before, something I talk about quite a lot is that physical movement of moving through problems in your head. The physical movement and momentum really helps with that. And I sometimes listen to podcasts. I don't always, I go through phases, but sometimes listening to a podcast where I've been listening to ideas and consuming ideas will help me to be more creative. And that definitely happens more when I'm walking and in nature, and you can see the horizon massively in front rather than a concrete block on a road.
Yeah, there's a lot of metaphors, isn't there, in nature, that if you set out on a walk, even with a little intention, whether you've got a problem that you're thinking about or you just need a little bit of space to think things through, I quite often go outside and then I'll see some metaphors that for me help to create, say, social media content or just an idea to then work through. But without that as a stimulus almost, I think you can suffer really from a writer's block or just a block in general, a creativity block. But anything that people can sort of find, and I think quite often we're drawn to things, but again, that sort of overwhelm and our busyness, and we can tend to not necessarily listen to the little nuances that we see around us that are kind of trying to give us that stimulus, that creativity, those little ideas generation, and until we sort of stop and listen or observe, somehow it can be difficult.
Yeah, and I think the systems and structures that we live in, just in the Western world, it'll become more apparent over coming months as we move into winter that you say, I get up in the dark and I go to bed and it's dark and I never get to see the light, especially if people are working from home potentially. If you get up and it's dark outside and you're at your laptop or you're at your computer all day, and then it's dark again and you've never actually left the house, you never got any fresh air, you haven't moved your body. And there's a lot of research and science that says even in the winter, just getting outside and getting some of that daylight helps with the circadian rhythm. So getting enough sleep will then help with creativity, all of that. But the weather in the UK doesn't always help. But dark mornings, dark nights, people, and the cold, people just want to stay inside and they'll choose comfort over, I don't know, the creativity or doing what our bodies need.
Yeah, and I think you can still be creative when you're inside, maybe thinking work aside, and social time, personal time. But yeah, you still need that fresh air, and you still, if you're being creative inside, you're not necessarily going to be moving at the same time, because you might be sitting there, you might be drawing, you might be solving a jigsaw puzzle or reading or something like that, which we can all say are creative, but we're missing that movement as well at the same time. I love winter because I like being cozy inside, but equally I love going outside and wrapping up, so that I'm snug inside and it's wintry outside. I mean, when I think about the couple of times I've climbed Snowdon, it's been awful weather. Rain has been coming at me from the side and it's just been awful, and I've got
Snowdon, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's something about still being outside regardless of the weather that is invigorating, and sometimes at the time you might think, oh, this is the worst thing I could possibly have done, but when you get back inside and you realize what you've done, and there's just something even more, I don't know, it's just a great feeling.
Yeah, there is. And I think just 15-20 minutes can make all the difference. And you can definitely be creative indoors, but I think my ideas I don't spark many ideas indoors. I tend to spark ideas outside and then get into the sort of the actual doing part of creativity indoors.
Yeah, and I think as those sparks also come from being with like-minded people outside as well, because you run the net walking, don't you? At Forest, which I've attended one once, which I thoroughly enjoyed. We had a beautiful evening, didn't we? The weather couldn't have been any better.
Perfect.
And just to have a wander around the woods, or the forest, should I say, with like-minded people who just pose questions, and you talk about things that aren't necessarily going to come to you when you're sitting there alone, or even if you're with the same team day in, day out. It's sort of like-minded people you don't see all the time, and people who are a little bit more perhaps open-minded as well. I think you get a lot out of that, and more of that, I say. And you do. If you let the listeners know how often you run those net walks, and then also your immersive events as well.
So it started off just once a month doing the walk around Delamere during the day, around Delamere Forest, and then as we went into British summertime, I did the evening walks, which is this one that you came to, which are such beautiful walks. It's so quiet, and it's just a very different feeling in the evenings. So I do those, and it's amazing because it's always purpose-led business owners that come along who are just looking for maybe a difference from the traditional networking event where you're sitting in four walls and you're waiting and worrying about that pitch that you've got to give, your 90-second pitch and stand up. And so there's all of that is taken away. We're just like walking and chatting, and sometimes we even talk about business, don't we? It's just whatever comes up for you. You're in nature. Even when there's silence, it doesn't feel uncomfortable because there's so much going on. And so I just find I always leave those events just feeling really uplifted. And kind of one of my phrases is food for the soul. So that's definitely food for the soul when I do those events. And I run my immersive networking events with a coach colleague of mine, Chris Kenworthy, and we do walks in the Peak District, and they're more immersive. So they're very much really bringing people into the space. We'll sit and have conversations and chats, help each other from a business point of view, any challenges, and just really get you out of your head and into your body, and give you that creative time to just work through some problems with like-minded business owners. We're doing one at Aberfalls in North Wales at the end of September, where that will be a walk. It's a short walk. It's only about 2 kilometers up to the waterfall. If weather permits, we'll take a dip in the water.
Wild
To just
swimming.
just to reinvigorate the senses. And then we'll sit on the side and do some journaling, do some writing, journaling, or just free talking, whatever it is from a creative point of view. What do you need at that point to feel creative? Because again, there's science behind the positivity of I think it's like the negative ions that the water, when it's crashing over the waterfall, really impacts the brain and how it works. And there's a lot of sort of mindfulness, meditation, creative, what's the word, like supplements that you get from being near a waterfall. And then that's a dawn event. So that's usually getting there for about 7:30 in the morning. So it's nice and quiet. We have that little bit of space, take some tea with us, and then walk back again. And those are the events that we tend to do. We do vision board and Reiki events as well from a wellness point of view for people to really understand, feel into their bodies, see what the Reiki brings up for them, and then they create a vision board off the back of that, what they want to kind of work towards. Because again, that's creativity in a different way. It's the stuff that we don't tend to do unless you work in that particular field, cutting and sticking and putting things together and using colour and pictures and words. And again, it's not a spreadsheet. It's something where you're using your whole body, you're using all of it to bring something to life.
And it's exciting, that is. I think it's one of those things that we're kind of getting in touch with our little child or inner child again, and scissors and crayons and magazines and paper and things everywhere, but we're just playing with things. But actually there's a purpose to it, and there's a very meaningful outcome to it as well. And I've done that a couple of times in the past. I've also done versions where I've put it online, and there's just not the same. It's not the same when it's online. So the kind of touchy and feely and everything, just it invokes more senses. You're there with other people, so you can share ideas, people can ask questions, and there's just way more energy, positive energy around an exercise like that. And also Reiki as well, with it being an energetic complementary therapy. And I think now it's got a lot more people understand Reiki than they used to. I actually had a refresher course in Reiki about 3 weeks ago, because I trained in it 20 years ago.
Wow.
Nobody had ever heard of it then. And I want to bring a little bit more of that into what I do. And I kept feeling as though I was being sort of called to the Reiki, and I'd see things that sort of suggested it. So I thought, no, I'm going to have to listen, which is what we were saying right at the start, wasn't it? Listen to sort of your body and your senses, and just kind of grasp the opportunity when you can. And it's interesting what you should say about waterfalls as well, because recently when I went away on holiday, we visited a national park called, I'm going to not say this right now, something like that in Croatia anyway. And it was full of waterfalls. It was beautiful. And we went to the big touristy area, the trail that went all around them. So there was a lot of people there, but it was interesting how also relaxing and chilled it was as well. There was very little that kind of drew my attention away from the water. Considering there was a lot of families there and young children, then, there would have probably been a lot of, loud voices and exciting screams and that sort of thing. But I was very chilled there. So it's interesting what you say about water and wild swimming and just taking those wild dips. There's a lot of science around how that helps with mental health, isn't there? So I kind of everything that you offer, all the services that people can come to you for, are backed by science really, and how it helps mental well-being, physical well-being, and people have got a choice as to what they're drawn towards.
What they're drawn to, exactly. And it's all, most of them are basically just permission, giving people permission to do these things, to go for a walk. It feels in your own business to just get up and go for a walk for a couple of hours. You might be like, I've got so much to do. But if you've booked onto an event and you're going to meet other people, and you might meet some great connection, make some great connections, or just some like-minded people, there's like a permission to leave your desk and go away. With the vision board and the Reiki, the energy is charged in the room in a certain way because of the Reiki practitioner, and that's what she does. And then I do the vision boarding, but it's permission to start, just get a bit fun and a bit creative and do things that you wouldn't necessarily sit at home with your scissors and your glue and your sticking and stuff. you'd always find something more important.
Yeah,
the
clean
same
the fridge or
yeah. But it's just bringing that element of fun and a little bit of adventure and a little bit different, and things that may be a little bit scary. But I'd like to think that one of my big sort of driving forces is, a lot of the time when I worked in the corporate world, I was heading up sort of corporate service, customer service. That was a big part of my job. And as a coach, I hold people in that space. And so what is really important to me is that people that come along might be a little bit scared about doing something a bit different with people they don't know. But I hold them in that space and make them feel welcome and included and sort of excited to come along, so that it takes some of that scariness away. Because, yeah, it can be really daunting to do something you've never done before, meet people that you haven't done before. And something I always joke about, particularly my networking, I'm inviting people to come and meet me in the woods. I'm a stranger. Meet me in the woods. And that's just a very strange concept for me to be putting out there. So it's really important to me that people feel welcome and they feel really held and they have all of the information available to them, so that it takes some of that scariness away.
Yeah, definitely, because people don't like anything that's uncertain. We don't like change. So all of those things that appear new or appear as though, well, that's not really the way that I've done things before. That's not how it should be done. Well, who says? Why not just go and try it? And by making people feel as comfortable as possible in taking that next step, just helps them to feel a little bit more at ease with the whole process when they get there. And then, of course, when they get there, it's all great fun. It's all positive. It's all creative. It's all sort of, energy boosting. So then you get to the end of it. Why did I have any doubts? Let's do this again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, all great fun. So you mentioned journaling as well in your immersive events with your colleague, and I love journaling. I'm trying to build a bit of more of a business around journaling and having some online workshops, and then also some workshops and things in the community, because part of my journey, really, a journal has helped me massively in just being able to empty my head with thoughts, work around why is this emotionally triggering me in some way? What ways can I kind of approach this in a different way so that I've got a better outcome? And that's massively helped me in lots of different areas in life. And I come across people and they don't really get what journaling is all about, and they certainly don't get how it can help with their well-being. It's sort of seen as, oh, well, why would I do that? Why would I just get out a pen and write it? So what's your earliest memory around journaling for you, and then perhaps from the approach of it helping you or somebody else from a well-being point of view?
Yeah, this is something I was thinking about earlier on, before we started the podcast. And I used to write a diary every day, especially in my teens. I used to get at Christmas, I used to get the really boring looking Collins day to a page.
Yeah,
write every single night.
It's a teenage girl thing, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Than the man.
Yeah.
And it was I don't know. But...
yeah, it's all about the boy that I fancied and he looked at me and all of this sort of stuff. And then I think when I was in my 20s, I just felt really embarrassed of it, and I never wanted to read any of them. And I think I just got rid of them. I've got rid of them all. And now I wish I hadn't, because I think I was just embarrassed of like the teenage angst that was there. But now I obviously know that that's normal, and that's what everybody did. And it'd be quite interesting to look back, especially as I've got a 13-year-old daughter, to just see any parallels. And then I didn't really write or journal for quite a long time. And then over recent years, I go in and out as and when I need to. But I think particularly if I'm feeling very in my head, and I'll tend to do a gratitude kind of journal when everything feels all encompassing. I find it really helpful to do a gratitude journal, because and I also do every month, I do a review of the month previously. And that's a type of journaling where I will just sit down and write down everything that's gone really well for the month, all my successes, and then all the things that I found really challenging. And I started doing that maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. I remember when I still worked in the corporate world, there was a role that I'd been sort of shoehorned into that I really didn't want to do, but I said I'd give it a try, and it just didn't feel like it was going. I just didn't think it was going particularly well at all. So I sat down and I was like, right, what are the things that are going really well?
Yeah.
And what's not going so well? And I think the difference when you journal and you write it down is when it's all in your head, because we've got a negativity bias. We're very drawn to the negatives. So that's all I could see. I was thinking, it's not going very well. It's not very successful. I'm not doing a good job. But when I wrote it all down, all of the negative, the challenging things, there was at least 5 positives that I had for every negative thing there. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because in reality, when I've written it all down, I'm doing really well and the job's going brilliantly. But I could only focus on the negative stuff. So I find it really helpful to take stuff out of my head and put it down, because our brains are not meant to be like a notepad. They're not meant to hold all of this information, and it takes a lot of energy. And we're in a world, most of us are depleting in energy anyway. There's so much going on, so much vying for our attention, that we don't have the mental capacity to hold all of this and to process it. So getting it out of your head and onto paper, that's when I really find that it's helpful. And just the act of writing, I'm doing that sign now, rather than putting it on. There's loads of great fancy apps and electronic ways of recording information, but I still like, I think it must be like a, it's like something with your brain will process it better when the act of writing.
Yeah, it does. It sort of embeds the meaning better. There's more to it than that, but just
neural pathway. That's what I was thinking. The neural pathways are linked.
Yeah, fire them up more.
Yeah, so that I find that really, really helpful. I do some overnight gong baths as well with a local like sound healer. And when I do those, I feel compelled to write. Actually, after that, I feel like all of this stuff has come up for me and I need to get it out of my head and write it down. So they're quite interesting. For me, it's quite healthy to have a flexible approach to journaling, because I can be somebody who can get very rigid, and when I'm like, no, I must journal every day, it takes the joy out of it. So I'll be quite flexible with it.
I'm exactly the same, and I think it's important as well, because there's a lot of particularly these sort of 5 a.m. business gurus, saying you must stick to the habit, you've got to do the same thing all the time. And yes, there is benefits in doing that with certain things, but there's not a benefit in it if you then start to beat yourself up about something because you've forgotten. And I have done that with journaling myself, particularly when I try to do some of the online ones, because it encouraged you to write a certain number of words, and it was good from the point of view that you had sentiment and you picked out certain words and things like that, which is you're not necessarily going to be able to do that yourself when you're just writing on a page. But then I got to the point where I'd be really annoyed with myself that I hadn't written anything, I had forgotten, and then I always said, oh God, I need to go and write in the journal at 11 p.m. at night when that's past my bedtime, so it's not going to be free flow writing as it should do. It's important, I think, to sort of just approach those things when you feel the need to, and you choose the type of journaling, like you've mentioned a couple of different types there, that works for you. Gratitude, problem solving, reflection on what worked well, what hasn't. And I think it helps to reframe a lot of things, doesn't it? That you see those positives, whereas if you hold it in your brain, you do tend to focus on the negative. And also fresh perspectives, new thinking, ideas sparking, there's all sorts of ways, and even going as far as putting little doodles and things like that in a journal to help to just really play on a point, or help to develop an idea.
I find it quite cathartic when I look back as well, because I use those as the basis of my end of year review. And it'd be like things that I found challenging maybe at the start of the year, now they're not even an issue, because it just shows progress and growth and personal development. And just switching your brain to think about things that you found challenging will mean that you can course correct a little bit. And you might not see it month on month, but when you look at it in a 12-month overview, it helps to give you a sense of satisfaction and see the progress that you're making as well. So, and it doesn't take that long to do. But it was interesting when you went back to say, when you said before that there's certain times when, certain courses and things that promote for you to do things every day, and you found that you've got into that loop of feeling obliged to do it. It's that link again, going back to your body. What's your body telling you it needs right now?
And I over the last probably 12 to 18 months, I've really started listening to my body a lot more. And now I've got a sensation of numbness almost if I'm working on a task, or I've been asked to do something, or something has happened, and if I'm not in alignment with it, I know immediately almost. And sometimes if it's if I work, because I've still got some regular retainer clients that I write for, sometimes I still have to try and work through that because it's part of my remit for them. But if there's anything new, then it's my kind of cue to say no to that, because that's just not going to serve you very well. And the headaches as well, you mentioned headaches before when you were in the corporate world. I get worse headaches now, and I think part of that maybe is hormonal, the age that I am, but also I am well aware of them coming on in a certain situation. It's usually a situation where there's almost too much stuff going on around me. There's too much sort of frenzied energy almost, and it's not kind of my comfort zone in what I would like to do. So although unfortunately I have to remain in that scenario for various reasons, sometimes I'm aware that it's not suiting me well. So the quicker I can get out of it, or the quicker I can sort of, redo something or even reframe it in my own head.
Yeah.
There's good points about this, because there always is. But yeah, it's so obvious to me now. Now I start to pay attention to my body and, my senses and what I'm feeling instead of just what's in the head.
Yeah. And it takes time to do that. I remember I'm somebody who can get quite impatient, because I can have quite a fast flowing energy.
Yeah.
And so if I was to be listening to this podcast, I'd be the sort of person that goes, oh, I need to do that from now. And then I get frustrated if I don't do it. But it takes time, and it evolves. And what I know about myself today is more evolved than what I knew about myself 6 months ago. And it just continues to evolve. I've recently realized that when it comes to creative ideas, as I said before, my brain is quite busy and I'll have lots of ideas. I'll kind of move the feeling and the sensation through my body and see how it fits in each stage of my body. So if I've got an idea that's in my head and it's very busy, and I try and move it down to maybe my solar plexus area. If it doesn't feel comfortable there, that's the sign that I need to just take a step back from it. Whereas if I've got an idea and a feeling and it fits right in my solar plexus, I feel like, right, that's one that I feel connected with. But I'll have to shift stuff around for me to get an idea of, is this a good idea? Is it not? Is it got legs? How am I going to? Generally, ones that are in my head will fizzle out quite quickly. So I have to practice some restraint and go, okay, let's just put that down and see how I feel about it in a couple of days.
Yeah.
And generally it's gone.
That's a really good example of an exercise that people can go through. Do you try and do that in sort of a meditation type process in moving that idea down?
Yeah. It depends. I think it depends on how big the idea. If it's a really big thing, like taking on a job or something, I will dedicate time to sit and feel with it. If it's a quick idea about, I don't know, a social media post, I'll do a quick body scan and I'll just be like, I can't move that from my head. So it's probably best to just park it for a little bit. And maybe it's not a bad idea. It might just be the framing of it. I might just need to put it down and look at it again.
I use a Trello board in that. Again, that's online for business, because if I have an idea, then I'll jot it down. Whereas if something feels right, I can almost, particularly with social media, I can write the post there and then, and it just
process it.
Yeah. Quite often though, it's funny you should say, when I do sort of park it, I quite often don't come back to it.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I'm like. Yeah. Or it comes back in a very different guise, it's only very thinly loose. So there is a spark in it, but it's a total reframe.
Yeah. And again, just the act of writing or sitting with it, whatever works for you as an individual, can really just help to tease out and again, just, that being comfortable with how that works for you.
Yeah. It seems like we have very similar approaches, but there'll be people that listen that it doesn't work for them. That doesn't mean that's not right. That's just them. I'm somebody who is quite a body type of person. So I do feel things very much in my body. Some people, it will feel different, and there's no right or wrong. It's just getting used to what feels right for you.
It is. And I think if I was to, if anyone's sort of, playing that over in their own mind, the one thing I would say to people is, to just kind of be curious about that. Because I mentioned that 20 years ago, I trained in Reiki. Well, I used to be a complementary therapist, and then I went to work on cruise ships as a massage therapist. That was just that was so kind of conveyor belt process that I sort of lost that caring attitude for the person that I was treating. So I thought, I can't do this anymore. I need to get out of it. So I kind of went back into marketing and communications as an industry, which is very head driven, I think, unless you're purely on the creative side, which I don't think that many people are purely on the creative side. There's always an element of strategy. And I didn't like that area, that I felt really bogged down with that, but I never listened to that sort of natural feelings. And part of me wishes, and I don't really, so I don't try to have any regrets or anything like that, because I think you are where you are for a reason, and you know exactly where you need to be at the time. But I almost think, where would I be now if I'd have stuck with therapies and, you know, all of the sort of natural complementary side of things, without letting that logic and rationality and the corporate stuff to come back in? Because I've almost done like a 3-circle with it, and that, you know, I should have just stuck with it and just listened to it and you know, followed through, but just found a different route in that industry.
Yeah. I think some of that comes with age and experience, doesn't it, with that reflection and hindsight. But there's also, I think we're probably a similar age. We didn't grow up with access to a lot of the alternatives that people do now as well. When we were in our early 20s, we didn't have access to social media and all of this world of opportunities. We were going down to the library, or I was waiting for a Sunday to go to my parents' house for dial-up to try and get online when they were on for, you know, so we didn't have access to the same sort of information. You can just, it's all in the palm of your hand now, an idea, and you can just go, oh, actually I can do all this and that. Because I wanted to go and I didn't go to university, I wanted to do psychology, but I didn't want to be a psychologist. So I thought, I don't really see the point. Whereas now I can see that there's loads of different branches off psychology, and it would be a great route into doing so many things that I love. But at the time I didn't have access to that information. So I think there's that element of it as well, that we maybe look back in hindsight, all these things that we could have done, because we now have access to see what is available.
We were almost limited to the information that we were shared with by the careers officer at school, and you know, that would have been very, very limited to their own knowledge. You know, one person can't know everything, can they? No. You're absolutely right, and I don't think I'd change that time, because I think personally I'm quite grateful that I didn't grow up with all that social media, you know, that kind of online pressure. I loved having to, you know, punch in the telephone number of a friend and ring up
and remember it off by heart.
It's quite, you know, I mean, now we see that time away from technology and things like that as invigorating, don't we? It's, you know, it's a real way to sort of relax and calm the mind. But you're absolutely right, as far as, you know, being curious and research and, okay, well, where might that lead? It's made phenomenal opportunities for people.
It has.
Yeah. Oh, how different it would be. Well, I've loved talking to you this morning, Ellie. Thank you so much for your time. Do you want to just let people know how they can get in touch with you? What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, so the 2 social channels I'm mainly active on are Instagram, so you can find me under Elevates with Ellie, and LinkedIn with my name, Ellie Lloyd-Jones. Or if you look at Elevate with Ellie on Eventbrite, that's where all of my events are listed. And yeah, my website has got all my coaching information, which is www.elevatewithellie.co.uk. So generally just my name, Ellie Lloyd-Jones, or Elevate with Ellie, will find me in all of those places.
Perfect. So connect with Ellie first, go on a walk in Delamere Forest. Yes. Not local to that, then then connect otherwise. And you take some of the events a little bit further afield anyway, don't you, so people can perfect. Thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on it.
Thank you for listening to today's Writing with Purpose podcast. Having conversations with fellow writers or adventure enthusiasts brings 2 of my biggest loves in life together: writing and nature connection. I've been a copywriter and content creator for 23 years, but my passion is writing for well-being, and I'm on a mission to share the benefits that putting pen to paper has for personal wellness with as many people as possible. If you want to learn more about writing for your well-being and journaling techniques, please connect with me in my Facebook group, Journaling with Anna.